How do you defend a misdemeanor? One way is by proving it wasn't really a misdemeanor at all, by somehow manipulating the person into thinking that he's guilty of the same thing, but just doesn't remember it. Sounds like a good plan, right? The British kinda attempted to whitewash over their colonial iniquities against their subcontinental subjects by a similar scheme, with the help of missionary scholars and researchers. The Indian population was made to believe that they are not really indigenous, but are themselves just products of an earlier invasion which no one remembers. Because apparently if you are a colonial spawn, there's nothing wrong about someone else colonizing you. In 1850, around the time of the birth of German nationalism, a young German scholar named Friedrich Max Muller joined Oxford as a deputy professor, rose through the ranks, and due to his extensive knowledge of Sanskrit and his work related to the translations of Upanishads, was commissioned by the East India Company to become the leading commentator on Indian culture. Ironical, isn't it? He then put forth what we now know as the Aryan invasion theory, wherein it was hypothesized that the Aryans, a fair-skinned steppe nomadic tribe from the Caucasus, invaded the subcontinent around 1500 BC and pushed the dark-skinned indigenous Dravidian population southwards, and then wrote the Vedas and hence founded Hinduism. You can probably understand how this Machiavellian plan could help achieve their vision of creating the God's empire, since, if you could just make Hindus believe that Hinduism is not indigenous to the land, and if there was nothing wrong with the invading Aryans imposing Hinduism on them, then it would not be wrong of the British Empire to convert them to Christianity either. But on the contrary to what some of our brilliant researchers/columnists would have you believe, the theory was full of holes and didn't have substantial evidence to hold ground. When the idea for the Aryan invasion was developed by Max Muller, he was formulating dates based on the biblical tradition, which establishes that the world was created in 4004 before Common Era. So, he decided that the Aryans had to have invaded India around 1500 BCE and then developed the Rig Veda thereafter around 1200 BCE. This means that such calculations are based on faith in the Bible and, accordingly, a group of linguistically unified people must have been present around the Caspian Sea before invading India. It is this biblical reference that formed the foundation of these dates. The Saraswati River has been the focal point of discussions around the Aryan invasion theory. It's been mentioned in the Rig Veda over 60 times. The descriptions indicate a large river of great importance, flowing from the Himalayas into the ocean. The importance of the Saraswati hence cannot go unnoticed. Besides references to the Saraswati River in the Rig Veda, we can find some in the Atharva Veda as well. The physical presence of the river Saraswati was established over the second half of the 20th century by the efforts of geologists, satellite imaging by NASA and ISRO, aerial survey by the American Landsat satellite, and separate hydrological researches by Central Groundwater Commission and Babha Atomic Research Center. They established the presence of a river which flowed from the Himalayas into the ocean, which dried up after tectonic activity changed the courses of its major tributaries Sutlej and Yamuna rivers, and which varied from 3 to 12 kilometers in width. Water of Himalayan origin from as far back as 14,000 years was found underground. It dried up completely around 2000 BCE and was in the process of drying by 3000 BCE or before. Research explains that the demise of the Saraswati River was caused by the lack of water it had previously received from the Yamuna, which had changed its course to flow eastward into the Ganga. Then the Sutlej also turned southwest, while the glacial melt also decreased, all of which greatly weakened the flow of the Saraswati. This resulted in the Saraswati disappearing into the desert. This, along with the world drought that was known to have happened around 2200 to 1900 BCE, contributed to drying up the Saraswati River and creation of the Thar Desert. Thus, the Rig Veda had to have been written before it started to dry up, because there is nothing in the Rig Veda about the Saraswati diminishing in any way. However, we do find in the Mahabharata that the Saraswati was decreasing to a shorter course. Therefore, the actual date of creation of Rig Veda predates the one given by Max Muller by at least 2000 years, thereby falsifying his claims. In addition, even Muller admitted many years later in his life that these dates were arbitrary in nature, or merely guesses grounded on his own view of things, which were precarious opinions based on his allegiance to the Bible. He had written in admission,
I have repeatedly dwelt on the merely hypothetical character of the dates, which I have ventured to assign to the first periods of Vedic literature. All I have claimed for them has been that they are minimum dates, and that the literary productions of each period which either still exists, or which formerly existed could hardly be accounted for within shorter limits of time than those suggested. If now we ask how we can fix the dates of these periods, it is quite clear that we cannot hope to fix a terminus qua. Whether the Vedic hymns were composed in 1000 or 1500 or 2000 or 3000 BC, no power on earth will ever determine.
Mortimer Wheeler, after reporting a few skeletons being found at Mohenjo-Daro, said that the people of Mohenjo-Daro had been massacred in the invasion of the region. However, the skeletons had been found at different stratigraphic levels of the site. This showed that Wheeler was wrong in his assessment. Recent skeletons would have been found at the uppermost levels. Furthermore, at most of these sites, there is ample proof of continuity of habitation. An outside invasion also means the presence and entry of a new people, but no such evidence exists. Extensive archaeological evidence shows that many of the traditions and customs prevalent in the Indus Valley civilization continue to exist in modern India. Yoga, the Shiv Ling, the use of vermilion in married women's hair partition, the use of spiraled bangles among women in Haryana and Rajasthan, the folktale of the thirsty crow, the Namaste greeting, Lord Shiv's trident, and many other aspects of contemporary Hinduism and Indian culture are few examples. This refutes the theory that the Indus Valley civilization was destroyed and supplanted with a foreign Hindu culture and civilization, and proves that modern India is a continuation of that ancient civilization. Various genetic studies have been conducted in recent years which further debunk this theory. In genetic terminology, a haplogroup is a group of individuals that share a common ancestor with a particular genetic mutation. A haplogroup pertains to a single line of descent which typically dates back several thousand years. In other words, a haplogroup is a large extended family, all of whose members have a shared ancestry. These are of two types: Y chromosome, the patrilineal haplogroup, and mitochondrial DNA, the matrilineal haplogroup. Extensive sequencing and statistical analysis of a part of mitochondrial DNA has shown that certain sequences dominant in Europe are uncommon in India and, when found, are almost equally divided amongst the North and South Indians. Conversely, there are sequences common in India that are uncommon in Europe. The Y chromosomal haplogroup R1A1A, also known as RM17, is the world's most successful extended family. Its members possibly number over 1 billion. It is widespread across Eurasia, with high concentrations in Russia, Poland, and Ukraine, as well as in the Indian subcontinent and the Tuva region of Asiatic Russia. Studies reveal a clear distinction between Indian and European populations. South Asian populations have R1AZ93 subgroup, while almost all European populations have R1AZ280 subgroup. Datations show that the Z93 group is the most ancient at about 15,500 years old. It indicates that the R1A haplogroup originated in India, and the Indo-Aryan people have lived in India for a minimum of 15,500 years. Also, there have been studies which prove that the DNA of the people of India has not undergone a major change in the last 10,000 years. A common sentiment around the Aryan discussion is that the R1A1A is the Aryan gene and that it is found in the ancestors of the invaders who have steppe ancestry. Extensive study of South Asian genetics found that the effect of the Yamnaya steppe pastoralists on modern Indian DNA cannot be overstated. And the steppe ancestry is found in almost all Indian people groups, albeit in different proportions, across Varnas and regions. India has always been a melting pot of various people groups who, after stumbling upon this rich and nourishing land settled down here. Who and how it was decided that one of those belonged to a superior, colonizing race and invented Hinduism is beyond us. Part of the problem was a misinterpretation of the word Arya. With the AIT, it started to mean a race of people, or even a separate language. But the word Arya was always meant to be used as an honorific title for someone who leads a pure life, was on the path for attaining a pure and spiritually light consciousness, not a light-skinned person of another separate race. Archaeogeneticists, hoping to find R1A1A in every new Indus Valley civilization sample they come across, just so that they can disprove AIT, is kind of like a dog chasing its tail and giving fodder to Marxist publications like these, who would still like us to believe that Aryan invasion theory is legit. It has often been hypothesized that the horse was not indigenous to India and was brought by the invading Aryans, along with the chariot. However, horse seals and bones have been found at several Harappan sites. Furthermore, when deciphering the seals, the Sanskrit word for horse, ashva, is a commonly occurring word on the seals and is also found 215 times in the Rig Veda. Horse remains have also been found in places like Kuldiwa, Bagar and Mahagara in the interior of India, dating back to 6500 BCE. Clay horse figurines, like the terracotta horse, have also been found from Lothal. In addition, cave paintings of horses have been discovered in Bambetka, which are from around 10,000 BCE. A study of the horse anatomy shows that there were two types of horses in the ancient world that we still find today. There is an Indian type that has 17 pairs of ribs and a West and Central Asian horse that has 18 pairs. Also, the domestic nature of the horses found from these sites was established as far back as 1993. Furthermore, the Rig Veda also describes the horse as having 34 ribs, with a similar description in the Yajur Veda. This shows that the native Indian horse has been in India for many thousands of years. The thing about the horse is that it was a greatly prized and valuable animal. So, there may not be many circumstances that would allow for horse bones to be found. Now coming on to the topic of Chariot, Archaeological Survey of India excavated Sonali, a Harappan-era site in Uttar Pradesh in 2018. They managed to find the first ever ancient chariot discovered in India. This chariot has been dated from around 2100 to 1900 BCE. It is a solid wheel chariot, but contains triangular-shaped radial reinforcements made of copper, making it better than the spoked wheel fast chariots unearthed in other parts of the world, avoiding quick breakage of wheels while moving fast. The chariots from the similar era unearthed from Mesopotamia are also solid wheel chariots, but are very primitive compared to this chariot. So, the chariot was here long before the alleged invasion. There are many reasons why common sense can tell you that there could not have been any invasion into Aryavrat by Vedic Aryans from outside. If the Aryans were supposed to be rambling barbarians, as viewed by some, and yet were able to develop such a sophisticated language, i.e. Sanskrit, and compositions, the Vedas? And how did they not leave in the countries they left behind a rich culture that shows their previous developments? What happened to their descendants who should have kept the remnants of their culture and language? Why were not similar developments made by those who remained in Eastern Europe? If there indeed was a clash of civilizations between the Aryans and the Dravidians, why isn't such an important event recorded by either of them? Especially given that the invading Aryans brought culture and sophistication, and even documented a whole new religion for the uncultured indigenous population. Why doesn't the Dravidian literature contradict Vedic literature? Why is the invention of Tamil language attributed to Agastya, a Vedic sage? Why doesn't the earliest book of the Aryans, the Rig Veda, talk about the flora and fauna of their homeland, the Caucasus, but instead mentions tropical trees like Ashvata, Kadira, Nagradhas which don't belong to the cold climate? Likewise, the Rigvedic fauna, comprising species such as the lion, elephant, peacock, also belong to a tropical climate. One does not need to have a scholarly background to read Max Muller's own writings, which are available for all in the public domain. This is what Muller wrote to his wife.
The translation of the Veda will hereafter tell to a great extent on the fate of India and on the growth of millions of souls in that country. It is the root of their religion, and to show them what the root is, I feel sure, is the only way of uprooting all that has sprung from it during the last 3,000 years. One ought to be up and doing what may be God's work.
2 years later he also wrote the Duke of Argyll, then acting Secretary of State for India.
The ancient religion of India is doomed. And if Christianity does not take its place, whose fault will it be?
This is what he wrote to Chevalier Bunsen.
India is much riper for Christianity than Rome or Greece were at the time of St. Paul. The rotten tree has for some time had artificial supports, because its fall would have been inconvenient for the government. But if the Englishman comes to see that the tree must fall, sooner or later, then the thing is done. I should like to lay down my life, or at least to lend my hand, to bring about this struggle. I do not at all like to go to India as a missionary, that makes one dependent on the parsons. I should like to live for 10 years quite quietly, and learn the language, try to make friends, and see whether I was fit to take part in a work, by means of which the old mischief of Indian priestcraft could be overthrown, and the way opened for the entrance of simple Christian teaching.
An examination of these writings paints us a clear picture of Muller's Christian and missionary aspirations when he theorized the Aryan invasion. In his later life, he however takes a completely opposite stance, thereby almost disowning his life's work.
I have declared again and again that if I say Aryans I mean neither blood nor bones, nor hair nor skull. I mean simply those who speak an Aryan language. In that sense, and in that sense only, do I say that even the blackest Hindus represent an earlier stage of Aryan speech and thought than the fairest Scandinavians. To me an ethnologist who speaks of Aryan race, Aryan blood, Aryan eyes and hair, is as great a sinner as a linguist who speaks of a Dolichocephalic dictionary or a Brachycephalic grammar.
Aryan invasion theory has been the center of a lot of debate among scholars and common folk alike. Despite having major flaws, no documented proof and some shady researches at its core, over time it has become a tool for polarization to score political goals. Imaginary divisions were created by pitting the North Indian Aryans against the South Indian Dravidians, high caste against low caste, mainstream Hindus against the tribals, Vedic orthodoxy against the indigenous orthodox sects. And to neutralize Hindu criticism of the forced Islamic and British occupation of India, the argument that Hindus themselves entered India in the same way as Muslims did was presented. This is one of the reasons why you'd see a lot of proxy social media handles from across the border promoting this hypothesis. Migrations happen all the time, cultures get appropriated, and new gods replace the old ones. But the triumph of the dark-skinned incarnation of the Supreme Lord over the nature deity, the veneration of the Indus Valley god that resides in the Himalayas and dons a snake around his neck, his elephant-headed son who is the harbinger of all good things, the celebration of the mother goddess of Indus Valley even in the geographically opposite region, posthumous rituals to attain moksha by becoming one with the rivers that originate in this land, are the things that define Dharam. If that doesn't convince someone that Hinduism is inherently indigenous and essentially intertwined with this land, nothing probably will. We are working on bringing many more such stories to you in the future. Subscribe to our channel to not miss out on them. And consider liking and commenting on this video. Until next time.